and welcome to the 16th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol, Banega, Swasth India, at the Darbar Hall. We are delighted to introduce Sing, Dance and Pray with Hindol Sengupta in conversation with Makarand R. Paranjape. This session is presented by ABP Live. The story of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON, is traced in historian Hindol Sengupta's new book, Sing, Dance and Pray, the inspirational story of Srila Prabhupada's Founder-Acharya of ISKCON. The book sketches the moving account of her mission to introduce the ancient teachings of Vedic India to mainstream America and spread the Hare Krishna movement. In conversation with author and academic Makarand R. Paranjape. I'm delighted to introduce our first guest. Hindol Sengupta is a multiple award-winning historian and author of 10 books. He has been a Chevening Scholar in Area Studies and International Relations at Oxford. He is a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. His latest book is Sing, Dance and Pray. Joining him is Makarand R. Paranjape, a professor, poet, critic, novelist, and columnist, and the author of several books, including JNU, Nationalism and India's Uncivil War, Identity's Last Secret, and Swami Vivekananda, Hinduism and India's Road to Modernity. The 150th anniversary edition of the Penguin Sri Aurobindo Reader, edited by him, is scheduled for release in 2023. Over to you.
Hare Krishna, everyone. So we just had a fascinating session a while ago on political economy. And it's a nice segue to talk about spiritual economy, okay? Because there are all kinds of economies. There's a cultural economy, there's a social economy, but there's also a spiritual economy. And I believe all of them are interconnected. And Hindol is a wonderful interlocutor because he's also an economist. And he's written about rising India, and he's also a biographer. So he wears at least two hats. And he's written biographies earlier of Sardar Patel and of Swami Vivekananda, a passion that both of us share. So my first question to you, Hindol, is what made you write about A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada? But before you answer, I just want to ask people, how many of you have heard of Prabhupada? Raise your hands. Wow, that's a very good number, very good number. But apart from founding ISKCON, did you know that he went to the US when he was almost 70 years and he suffered a heart attack and he had no money and no friends and he started this international movement at that age? Isn't that an extraordinary story? Okay, so please read the book. You'll find many more interesting, bordering on miraculous incidents in this story. And of course, it has one source, which is Krishna, you know, the divine energy that propels him. But back to the question, Hindol, what made you pick up this topic?
Yeah. No, thank you, Makarand. It's as always delightful to be in conversation with you. I look at the audience and I see many, many friends here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. You know, I have been interested, and we were talking about this last night, Makarand, that the Penguin dinner. I have been interested for a long time when I wrote Being Hindu, and then when I wrote The Modern Monk on Swami Vivekananda. I've been interested in something called global Hinduism for some time now. And I am considering that as a future project. And in global Hinduism, when I started to map out global Hinduism, you know, who are the people who have had the greatest or the biggest footprint and impact, right? Vivekananda, of course, but Vivekananda is much more well known in that sense, right? ISKCON is very well known, but Prabhupada has mostly been written about from an insider's perspective. Mostly, there may have been one or two others, but mostly written from an insider's perspective. And what has happened because of that is, those are devotional books, for the lack of a better phrase. You know, they're often written by monks of ISKCON and so on and so forth. So we don't get really from their books a real contextualization of Prabhupada. And I'm really glad you mentioned, you know, here is this man who has never been abroad, who's barely actually ever been outside North India, right? Till at the age of 70, he pops up in New York and proceeds to, without any sort of support, proceeds to work among the drug addicts and hippies of Upper East Side and Upper West Side, and begins to create this movement which within only 10 years, because he only lives till about 80, creates a global movement of 100 centers and temples in 100 places around the world. There is no part of the world that he left untouched, from Switzerland to Australia, to Russia, Africa, there's no part of the world where he didn't touch. Of course, America extensively, Britain, and so on and so forth.
China.
I don't think in China. But my question, therefore, was that, look, how did this happen? Because this man didn't come from any resources. He didn't work with, quote unquote, the elite of society at all, right? But how did he do this? And why did he do this? He could have easily, Bhaktivedanta, AC Bhaktivedanta, Abhay-Charan Bhaktivedanta, right? That's his pre-monastic name. He could have easily continued to live on in Vrindavan and become a fairly senior, revered figure of the Gauriya Vaishnavite tradition and spend the rest of his days. And yet he chose to do this. But why? The other reason why I was interested in him is, and people don't often think about this when they think about Prabhupada and indeed think about ISKCON, is he's a great publisher, Makarand. He builds one of the great publishing empires of the 20th century. And really it's an empire, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust it becomes an empire, right? Because his guru had told him that you have a felicity with language, the English language. You use this to pronounce the name of Krishna around the world. And he's able to do it. Even in his early days, he's painstakingly translating. See, one of the things that is not spoken about, Makarand, is when he's building from the age of 70 to 80 all these great centers around the world, in the night from 9 o'clock onwards, he's sitting and painstakingly writing book after book, translating book after book, writing 70 books in his lifetime, which by the time he was done had sold hundreds of millions of copies.
In fact, the temples that were built abroad were built from the proceeds of the sales of the book. And if you look at the translations, everyone, if you just type Bhagavad Gita on the internet, the one that shows up is Bhagavad Gita as it is, which is his translation. But even the Bhagavad Puran, thank you. So I want to hold up the book for everyone to see. And, when the people who were very keen, ISKCON Bangalore, that the story of Prabhupada is told to the world. As Hindol rightly said, Vivekananda is very well known, but Prabhupada is not that well known outside the circle of the devotees of ISKCON and the Gaudiya Parampara. And, they were scouting for appropriate writers, and if I might say so, one of the key people in the organization asked me who would be a good person to write it, and without hesitation I mentioned Hindol. Now, there are many young people in this room, and many of you are here because you've read Hindol's earlier books, Being Hindu. So we need a different language in which to talk about some of these very important figures who would otherwise not be cool enough, not be hot enough, depends on what kind of weather you like. But what I wanted to say is that the book is very well written. It starts with the Beatles, there's a plane ride, George, Harrison, and so it's very engaging, which is an important thing. But which brings me to the other question, Hindol, that you had all these
I'll just finish that one.
Please.
So there's, of course, the book publishing, which is fascinating, right? How did this man suddenly go to the West and create this publishing empire, right? And that too, he wasn't selling anything that the quote-unquote Western people understood easily, right? So and the third thing goes back to my childhood. You see, when I was in Calcutta, early years, we used to live in a house which shared a boundary wall with an ISKCON temple. And one of the things, one of my earliest memories is ISKCON. So I used to see all these monks, play the mridangam and, play the dhol and sing and so on and so forth. But one thing they used to do, is in those days, you would have a lot of fairy walas. People would come and sell different things, this, that, sweets, whatever. They would sell cages with birds. And the ISKCON monks would buy them and release them. And my mother would always point this out to me that, look, what a wonderful thing this is. They keep buying them and they keep setting them free in the garden. So that somehow remained with me. And I think the dots, added up, as it were, when I began to write this book.
Absolutely. Nothing is accidental. If you read his book on Vivekananda, the modern monk, that also starts with a family story, like a little quarrel between his mother and young Hindol, because the family was a Ramakrishna mission family. So please read it. I'm not going to be a spoiler. But I want to, come back to this earlier question that we were raising. In fact, on a sidelight, I would have added eat, sing, dance, pray, and eat, because one of the things Prabhupada did wherever he went is he would feed people this wonderful, delicious vegetarian food. And people who ate the food and then they sang, there was kirtan, many of them stopped taking drugs or alcohol or cigarettes. And if you're a vegetarian, as I am, in any part of the world, if you are craving for vegetarian food, though now it's easily available, you have to find an ISKCON temple or restaurant, So it is still a place where you can get very delicious and wholesome food. And in New York and elsewhere, Prabhupada himself cooked. And nowadays, everybody's into dieting. But if you read in the book and elsewhere, he would always say, eat some more, eat more, eat more. And that's so refreshing, because his point was that when the food has been consecrated and sanctified, it doesn't harm you. You can eat to your fill. So in a way, I talked about spiritual economy, but the whole point about ISKCON, I think, or about Krishna Bhakti is Ananda. We think about the divine as Sat, Chit and Ananda. Truth is sometimes very unpalatable. People don't like you if you speak the truth. It's considered very tactless and you can get into all kinds of trouble. And someone says that on an average, we lie 100 times a day. I don't know if it's true, but there are white lies and black lies and whatever. And then Chit, it's consciousness, it's difficult to understand. But Ananda is very easy to understand. Everyone wants joy, everyone wants to be happy.
You mentioned food.
Food.
At Oxford, even today, the best vegetarian food is at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, which is run, as an affiliated organization to ISKCON, right? And food is, and my book has a few original recipes of Srila Prabhupada, and what he thought was the ideal recipe for a bunch of things. But yeah, he was again, and remember, and not just that, a lot of people don't know and don't, immediately understand. Akshay Patra is the world's biggest midday meal serving organization. Millions of children every day eat Akshay Patra food. But very few people, even if they know Akshay Patra, know where this comes from. You see, this comes from Prabhupada. It is Prabhupada who noticed one day outside wherever he was staying that children were really, starving, and they were trying to sort of, pick up from garbage food. And he was deeply moved, an emotional, spiritual man. He said within a 10-kilometer radius of an ISKCON temple, no one will ever go hungry. So Akshay Patra takes up from that,
And of course, it comes from the Mahabharata. It's what Lord Krishna gives Draupadi.
Akshay Patra,
The Akshay Patra, the vessel that is never empty.
That's right.
It's always full of food. So I'm very glad you brought that up. Everyone knows Akshay Patra. They don't know that it's ISKCON Bangalore which has created Akshay Patra. But let me ask you, Hindol, that...
just on a quick anecdotal note, the man who gave this name was Murli Manohar Joshi. Yes. Murli Manohar Joshi called it Akshay Patra. When the first discussions happened, Murli Manohar Joshi was one of the people who suggested Akshay Patra.
Wow, that is very interesting. You can check out Akshay Patra kitchens in many cities. There's one in Jaipur, I suppose. Go and check it out. See the hygiene, see the way they source the grains, and try and have a meal and judge for yourself. This is not propaganda, okay? Don't believe anything we say. check for yourself, be experimental. But let me ask you, Hindol, there is quite a bit of material within ISKCON circles on Prabhupada, right? How does your book depart from that? What do you do that's different, apart from repackaging?
No, I actually take an entirely, a lot of the ISKCON material is an insider's perspective. My perspective is not an insider's perspective. I am very clear about that. My perspective is entirely from the outside, entirely putting him in context to his times. You see, a lot of times when you have insider perspectives to these figures, it seems like, okay, this person suddenly appeared and did these wonderful things and then was no longer there. But why did they do these things? What were they responding to? All the questions a historian would ask, right? What were they responding to? What were the influences?
Absolutely. So this is my, follow-up question, which is that what we often do not understand or realize is ISKCON and Prabhupada, were a part of many very important conversations. In the passing, we heard about the hippies, the counterculture, drugs, and so forth. But what was the real challenge that, in a sense, Prabhupada was responding to? What was the hunger that he detected in the West, which also propelled him? His guru also said, go and preach over there. And would you say that that hunger, that longing still persists in the middle of this material culture that we live in?
That's right.
So much prosperity all around us. And yet there is some hunger, deep longing. What is that longing?
So, Prabhupada's guru had told him essentially, and again, this is what a parampara is, right? He had essentially told him, Sri Chaitanya said that the name of the Lord, the sweet name of the Lord, would be sung in every street and village and town in the world.
Yeah, but why? What is missing?
So,
what is it that ISKCON can give?
Correct. By the time Prabhupada landed in America, what he spotted, I think, is that there was already a society which was tearing itself apart on questions of what kind of life to lead. There was obviously a huge pushback to what today we would call the military-industrial complex, because these were anti-Vietnam War protests. And many of the young people who first joined Prabhupada, they were drug addicts not always because they wanted to be drug addicts. They were drug addicts because they were rejecting the life, the life of the late capitalist military industrial complex, the life that sort of system provided them, and the pulls and pressures of that system.
So Hindol, what is wrong with materialism?
No, there's nothing wrong with materialism, and I think
what's missing in materialism?
So Prabhupada argued that only materialism by itself as an end goal is the problem. You see, he says you can do everything as long as you know in your heart you're doing it for the Lord. And doing it only for your only pure material gain leaves you, it's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy, right? You fulfill this and you fulfill this and you fulfill this. After you fulfill everything, you still feel that there is something missing in your life. And that something, some people may say, I want to fill it with, love. But what does love really mean? In Prabhupada's world, you fill it with Krishna, you fill it with the divine, right?
Exactly. If I might sort of venture to answer my own question, I guess the point is Prabhupada going back to the sources of Indian thought and tradition,
and providing them in a different...
And Sanatan Dharma is basically saying we are not just the body. Who are we, as human beings? The body is certainly a part of who we are, but there's something else in us. And until that else, whatever else you want to call it, you can call it the self, you can call it the soul, you can call it the spirit, you can call it the Atman, you can call it whatever, the Jiva, the Jivatman. Until and unless we are able to recognize that element in us, which is not merely the body, you cannot be happy because that element is not being addressed or satisfied. So, if I were
And the wonderful thing about Prabhupada is, he realizes that this lesson,
Yes.
that there is something higher that the soul or the self seeks after everything is fulfilled, right? It's very hard to explain this to people. You can't give them a moral lesson, a sermon, and they'll understand it. The interesting innovation of Prabhupada in some senses is he is able to take the language of its time, of his time in America. There's a chapter in my book called The High of Krishna. But where does that come from? Because at that time, ISKCON monks were telling people who were getting their high from somewhere else that there is a better high to be attained, and it's through Krishna. And there's literally conversations where they say, and you never have to come down from the high. Because for every other high, you have to come down. But from the high of Krishna, you never have to come down. Prabhupada realized when Allen Ginsberg became his disciple, and then later George Harrison, that there was a method in which he could reach tens and thousands of people. And that method at that moment was music. So he got an entire record, which became a hugely best-selling record. So the man is constantly innovating. But having said that, let me say this. A lot of times people feel that, these gurus go and then they try to fix something in America and so on and so forth. Prabhupada never compromised on his basics. Like he never let go the kirtan. He never let go the puja and the arti in front of the vigraha. He never let go all the sort of, processes that was integral to him as in the Gaudiya Vaishnavite tradition. And he did not compromise. He did not say, okay, well, now I'm in America. It doesn't matter if you don't burn the incense. It doesn't matter if we don't do arti. You can eat first and then we'll do. All of this he kept intact. In one of my lectures, I was telling people, not only is he telling these people that there is a better life to be had beyond, you're searching for something and here is the answer. He's also teaching them a better life. One of the things he taught his early disciples was that you have to wash your hands and eat. You have to wash your hands before you eat. One of the things he teaches that hugely promiscuous age is, if you cannot be celibate, which is of course as a monk his first preference, then at least try to be faithful to one partner, which is why very early on, Srila Prabhupada is conducting marriages between his disciples. So, he's innovating, but without letting go his core values, which I find very interesting.
Very good. I think we'll take a few questions from the audience and then come back. And while you're thinking about a question to ask, I want to ask one, which is to do with his own gurus, Bhaktivedanta Thakur and so would you say that Gaudiya Parampara went through the Indian Renaissance in Bengal, but its contribution has not been recognized on par with the others? And the follow-up is that, in a way, Chaitanya was saving Hinduism from the onslaught of Islam at that time through the amazing innovation, of Kirtan, and unarmed, completely unarmed. And Rupa Goswami, Jiva Goswami was sent from Nadia to Vrindavan in the middle of Agra and Delhi. You're building a temple city, which would have been impossible. Do you think that once again in the 20th century, you were talking about Anandamath yesterday with me, there was an efflorescence where you had another pushback with another set of adversaries.
Correct.
And one of the adversaries was what we may call the material civilization, which completely blots out any sense of us as spiritual beings.
Absolutely. I'll take the first part first. Absolutely. One of my realizations, Makarand, through the process of writing this book was, when we talk about the Bengal Renaissance, we usually talk about two great streams, right? One, of course, is the Brahmo Samaj stream. Let's call it Brahmo Samaj Plus, which is, I was talking to Sanjeev the other day, it's sort of the modernizers, right? So this, of course, we know Vivekananda and his ilk, there are other, Rani Rashmani, whole bunch of people. So Brahmo Samaj is one, and then there is this Vivekananda stream, right? So there are two we always talk about, Keshav Chandra Sen and all these people. Then there's Vivekananda, Rani Rashmani, a whole bunch of other people. The third stream has not been understood. The third stream is the Gaudiya Vaishnavite reformers. They too, quite like in the other two sections, they too were rejecting what they saw as a corruption of the original message of Sri Chaitanya. Sri Chaitanya said, anybody who takes the name of the Lord, I press them to my heart, right? They saw that in their time, that corruption had seeped in so much that it had destroyed many of those institutions. In the earlier session with Ruth Harris, we were talking about Vivekananda talking about don't touch us, right? This is what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and Thakur and Bhakti Vinod Thakur also saw. They then said, well, we need to, in a sense, create the original message of the Gaudiya Vaishnavite tradition, Sri Chaitanya's message, and take it not just to India, but to every part of the world, saying that it doesn't matter. And I mention in my book, there's this great argument that happens, saying, oh, who has the adhikara? Who has the adhikara to spread the name of the Lord? And the answer that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Bhakti Vinod Thakur give is anybody who says, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. You take the Maha Mantra, you're entitled to embrace yourself, with the Lord and spread the word.
Exactly. In fact, in the Bengal Renaissance, at the forefront were non-Brahmins. So that's another aspect. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada was not a Brahmin. He was a Kayas, not a Kayas, he was a Vaishya. He belonged to the business community, the Maliks, and quite an important family. And Vivekananda was a Kayastha. And there were Boiddas. And of course, it's not that there were no Brahmins, but from Brahmo Samaj onwards, they did not accept the traditional Varna system. And even to this day, in the ISKCON tradition, anybody can get the thread. It's not by birth. You join, you have to undergo that training for a certain number of years. And interestingly, when they take on the robes, even when you become a sannyasi, they don't give up the thread. So it's a reformist movement, but it is very traditional. See, that's the other aspect of it. Whereas Ramakrishna Mission and others said you can worship whichever deities you like, ISKCON goes and converts people. By convert, I mean they accept, the path of the gurus of their lineage, and they wear dhotis, they wear chandan, they wear tilak, they shave their heads. They seem to be almost anachronistic. And yet, if you go to the Bangalore ISKCON temple, they're all engineers. Many of them are IIT graduates. Yeah. They're doing high tech. So it's a reformist movement, which is in a way back to tradition, which reminds me of another strand of the Renaissance, which we don't talk about that much. Dayanand Saraswati, his 200th anniversary is coming up. I believe on the 2nd of February, 1824, he was born. But let's take some questions from the audience.
I just want to just quickly
please.
add
we'll
something.
Come back to our conversation.
This thing about going back to tradition is a very interesting point. I address this in my book. Simultaneously, I think it was more difficult, the message that Srila Prabhupada was trying to deliver, and easy than compared to Vivekananda. Why more difficult? Because for the reasons that you said. Vivekananda went and said there is this formless Brahman, and it is eternal, and you can access it in whatever way you want. Prabhupada said no, the Godhead has personality, and that personality is Krishna. So you need to embrace all the aspects of the Gaudiya Vaishnavite tradition to access Krishna. While we are all embracing, but once you join or once you come closer, you must go through this process. It was easier, that was why it's more difficult, but it was easier because, of course, remember, many of the people who were listening to him understood that there would be a deity, so to speak, right? That there would be a Godhead with form, because after all, they were Christians, right? So this is, and on the point about them being, going back to tradition and being reformist, I was talking to Madhu Pandita Dasa and Chanchalapati Prabhu at the Bangalore ISKCON, when the Bangalore ISKCON, the first temple, Rajaji Nagar, when it was built, they built the temple for it to be slightly modern with some glass facade and this, that, and the other, so that they thought, a young city, lots of tech people would at least, they would think, okay, this is slightly modern, and have a conversation as an entry point. When they built the latest temple, the Rajadhiraja Govinda temple on the outskirts of Bangalore on Vaikunta Hill, they went back to the architectural tradition of Tirupati Tirumala, made entirely of stone. And the deity there is a replica, in a sense, of Tirupati, right? And in deference to the Lord at Tirupati, it's 1 centimeter smaller, I believe. So, because now they feel that people are coming to seek this tradition. They want this tradition. They're not coming to see some strange modernity when they come to a temple. Indians are finally confident enough to say, when I go to my temple, I want to see the way the temple is. I don't want to see one more glass facade, whatever. Right? So that's the trajectory. In that one anecdote, you basically, at least I think, you can tell the story of where we began at liberalization and where we have come to in 2023, right? So we are a far more confident people today, right? And therefore we are seeking the authentic, right?
Yes.
Rather than the, forced, in a sense. So this, the confidence of being able to seek the authentic is, I think, a great moment for us to emphasize.
Absolutely. And, theologically speaking, it's something very few people understand, that the Vaishnavite theology, its contention is that because the divine is omnipotent, therefore it is powerful enough to assume form. So they reverse the hierarchy of the formless divine being higher than the divine with form. And I think this puts paid to, in some ways, all the arguments against idol worship and so forth, by saying that it's much more difficult to be everywhere, to be omnipresent, to be omnipotent, and yet assume form for our sake, for this, because we have a form, apparently. So it is, in a way, a revolution of another kind, yes, to say that the divine with form is higher than the divine without form. And you can see this in the discussions that Ramakrishna used to have, because one of the first things he used to tell people, ask people when they came is, do you believe in the divine with form or without form? And of course he said both are right. That's a different matter. But we have about 16 minutes. Let me take some questions. Yes, sir. I see you first. Yes. Yes, please. Yes.
The microphone for the gentleman there, please. There.
Thought it will only start when I stand. Thank you. It's very interesting discussion. Spirituality is one of the things nowadays which is gaining popularity, and the author had actually explained a lot of things. I am a new student to spirituality, and I understand that the ultimate purpose of life is to attain salvation. And that salvation cannot be attained without materialistic, or Radha Tattva, we call it. Yeah. So Krishna and Radha are two elements, in my opinion.
What is the question, sir?
Question, I'm coming to the question now. So my question to you is, have you focused more on the aspect of salvation, which is the ultimate aim of this human life?
No, I have only focused on telling the story of Srila Prabhupada, sir.
Well, thank you, but it's a very important question from another point of view. I want to add a footnote.
Sure.
The attraction of a personal savior deity is very great in a world where people are unhappy and troubled. So when you're in deep trouble, you want a personal savior. You use the word salvation. See, these are terms that come to us from the Abrahamic traditions, especially the Christian tradition. But Prabhupada was able to tap into that deep need to have, and you read the Gita, and Krishna assures Arjuna, that, mamekam, sharanam vraja. So sarva dharman parityajya. So that assurance, and Prabhupada is saying the same thing, that this is your personal savior. He loves you. Krishna is nothing but love. And the Beatles say it, all you need is love. Love is all you need. So I think that need in modern times, when in a way the family is breaking down, you're not getting the kind of love and nurturing that children used to get in, more traditional societies. And even today, if you go to the villages of Vrindavan, the children are brought up with so much love and attention by everyone. But, in an atomized world full of alienation, ISKCON becomes attractive because you're lost and you're looking for salvation. You're looking for a savior, and the chanting gives you that confidence because the mala has to be chanted so many times in a day. Anyhow, thank you.
No, so I just want to add to that,
Please. And
I think this is a right moment because this topic has come up. And, Srila Prabhupada's story becomes important because Srila Prabhupada highlights that in the Kali Yuga, the Lord's presence in our life is through the mantra. That it is by chanting the mantra that you access the Lord in the most effective way in the age that we're in. Now, one of the great, traditions of the Gaudiya Vaishnavite, path is what we would call Sharanagati, that you submit yourself. But you see, Sharanagati is much easier said than done for most people. Especially people who think, everybody here in this room and all of us, everybody who thinks of themselves as thinking beings. Sharanagati doesn't come easy. And actually, Sharanagati especially doesn't come easy to a divine which has form. Therefore, the interesting thing is that, and again, we were talking about this in the earlier session. Today, people say we are SBNR, spiritual but not religious. But what does that mean? It means you are seeking something missing in your life, and yet you do not wish to give it any name or form. Now, the easiest thing there to say is that, okay, it doesn't matter. But in Srila Prabhupada's case, he's arguing, but it does matter. There's this wonderful statement where, in the Gaudiya Vaishnavite tradition, they say that the Vedantists are only feeling the heat. Like if Krishna is the sun, they're feeling the heat and seeing the sort of light around, but they are not yet seeing the Godhead, so to speak, right? So I think this attracted many, many people, especially at a time, and today of course, but especially at a time when Srila Prabhupada was alive, because the world was in great turmoil, because of the Vietnam War. And remember, many of the problems that started in America at that time continue even today. Absolutely. It's the same problems breaking America apart even today, right? The same, tribalism and so on and so forth. So this tribalism starts from there, right? So those problems today, and there's a reason why this hunger for some sort of solace, and this will only grow, this is my prediction, this will only grow. With climate change, our world is going to get tougher and tougher.
Yeah, and in a way, that is the opportunity for global Hinduism also. Yeah. I wanted to end with that, but there was a hand up here. I saw you, and then I noticed you also.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Bal Krishna, and sir, I loved your book, The Modern Monk. Actually, my question is related to the present crisis. You must have heard that a lot of companies like Facebook, the Google, Tesla, even the Indian companies are firing a lot of people, 10,000, 15,000 people. Now, my question is related to Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita has to offer a lot of management skills. So, sir, do you think how Lord Krishna would have handled all these things? And Mr. Sengupta, are you coming up with any book linked to Bhagavad Gita which can enlighten the whole world about looking at the management? See, there is no, you cannot go with only cutting jobs and hurting people like this. Do we have any solutions with the help of Bhagavad Gita? Thank you.
No, these are very important questions, Let me, since I have at the moment written a book on Srila Prabhupada, let me use his life, right? I think one of the most interesting management skills from the life of Srila Prabhupada, right, is that you are able to create a global institution with people who understand, to begin with at least, very little of your core motivations. Remember, ISKCON as it exists, especially at Srila Prabhupada's time, was built by a handful of foreigners. They were all mostly American disciples and then British disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Young men, all of them, who came together, and they had not had that much time to really absorb themselves in Indian tradition, but they were inspired enough to work and build this global, movement. And, building 100 temples at 100 sites, each of them massive, costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of effort. It requires a lot of skills. So those are some of the things that are very, very interesting to learn from his life. And as far as,
I just wanted to say that for Krishna, everything becomes possible. So the Juhu temple, the land, there was a man called Mr. Nair. It's an amazing story. They were attacked. So read the book. But the point is that you start with the assumption that if your motivation is pure, and it's only for the good of everyone, not for yourself, then you're an unstoppable force. Anyhow, we'll take some more questions. Yes, go ahead.
Hello. Hi. So, sir, in the modern world, as youth, we keep hearing from the perspective of Buddhism and also Hinduism that do chanting, just think about giving back to the society, and also at the same time be selfless. But at the same time, in the real world, when you go back to your jobs and day-to-day life, on the contrary, the world forces us to be selfish and think about us all the time before anybody else. And it's every day we get trained to do that. So it's just very difficult and confusing to really understand what to do as somebody who's seen the world during the 90s and the world now, because it's exponentially different. So for somebody who's born during the 90s, I think we've seen both parts of the world, the good one and the bad one. So it's very confusing, like what to do. So yeah, that's my question.
No, I think, and this is the contradiction that every human being faces. If anybody who has any sense of an inner life, and I want to make this point, Makarand, I've been thinking about this for a long time. If you look at our grandparents or parents, they had lives which were perhaps far more difficult than ours. I actually feel that many of us have exponentially easier lives compared to our parents. They really had a life which was, they didn't have enough money, everything was tougher, logistics was much tougher, infrastructure was much more tough and all of that, right? Often they had to cater for not only the immediate family, but a larger family, at least in India. But they had, most of them, some semblance of an inner life, which is increasingly absent. What do I mean by inner life? I would see my parents, no matter what, once or twice a week, they would go to a temple. Some function, something, they would go, to a temple, they will call a priest, they will do some puja, something, right? Many people would go every morning before going to work, they would go to a temple, ring the bell, do pranam and go. When I first became a journalist in my earlier avatar, I realized Pranab Mukherjee, who used to be finally became our president, the only 1 hour in the day which nobody, including his party president, if they reached out to him, couldn't reach him, was that 1 hour he used to do puja. Imagine his level of busyness. They had an inner life. What has happened is that inner life has entirely been destroyed with us. It has become a Netflix life or a mobile phone life. Whenever we have some time, we're like, okay, now let me, which is fine. But I think it's important. That's why you will see many more people are turning, because there is this hunger is there in everybody. They're turning to something. So that's why, many people listen to modern gurus on YouTube, right? Some people may say, I will do yoga. Some Vipassana is growing, something. People are seeking that inner life. That inner life destroying that inner life has done great damage to us. And I think it's important, especially for the young and all of us, to cultivate some sort of inner life. I'm not saying the whole day you go sit at a temple, but something, some sense where you recognize that you are part of a greater whole.
Hindol.
You see,
Yeah,
extreme capitalism teaches us we are the only thing.
We are running out of time, so we'll quickly just listen to one or two questions. I only wanted to say to you that the confusion is very good because it'll force you to inquire. And your self-interest and the interests of the universe are not separate. It's a continuum. The more selfish you are in the true sense, you realize what's really good for you, you know. Anyhow, now we'll just take 3 or 4 quick questions and we'll have Hindol giving the last word. Yeah, quick, because we have only 3 minutes.
My question is based on 2 terms. The first one is self-realization, and the second one is nishkam karma.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What does that mean?
No,
Okay.
no. I'm asking the question. The question is, someone who has asked a question to himself, why I am here? What's my duty in this world? Then which path should he take, the nishkam karma path or the self-realization path? Or they both go hand in hand? That's my question.
Thank you very much. One more question here. A young lady, go ahead. Quickly. We have only 2 minutes left.
Hare Krishna. I just want to say or ask one thing. Like, don't you think that why Prabhupada is not that famous? Because actually he gave the right answer. Like the conclusion. He gave the whole conclusion of and the gist of spirituality.
What is your question, ma'am?
My question is, don't you think that why Prabhupada is not that famous because he gave the gist? For example, like I want to quote one thing, like the value of G through which we calculate the mass, like a little bit science here. So either we can derive the whole thing or we can use the 9.6 value. Prabhupada gave the value. Therefore, he is not that much acclaimed in the world because this human mind is very curious and it wants adventure. So they rush to yoga, they rush to mantra, they rush to Kundalini yoga, they rush to everything. So I have just read one thing about Adi Shankaracharya ji, like the whole Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi and everything. And then at the end, even he quoted, Bhaj Govindan, Mood Mate.
Okay.
And the same thing is quoted by Prabhupada ji also. So maybe this is the reason why he is not that famous, because the human
Krishna
mind
is
wants
famous. He's not
richer.
famous. That's what she's saying. Last
Yes,
line. Yeah,
go ahead.
last word. Go ahead. The young person here in the maroon. Yeah.
Thank you for the session, sir. My question would be, why is there a certain disliking or pushback against the ISKCON within the Indian society? Like the allegations are that they are money-oriented or have the materialistic tendencies, or their approach to people is somewhat similar to proselytizing forces. Do you think these allegations are fair?
Let me begin with this very quickly. I don't have much time. Look, I would humbly suggest to everybody, see, this is the human mind. I genuinely feel we get too embroiled with things like this and we don't focus on the message. It would be much better to focus on not how the institution runs or whether it could be done better or worse, but if the message that the institution wants to give appeals to me and makes me better or not. Otherwise, you can keep getting embroiled in this saying, oh, but I think they, don't do this and they do that and whatever. But does the message, can I apply that message in my life and be better? It would be better to focus on that rather than, other institutional leaders. That's one. Self-realization. It depends. Whatever you want, whatever works for you, you should do that. And to your
Karma
question,
yoga also leads to self-realization.
and to your question, did he give the answer? If you feel he did, then that works for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hindol, very much. I think you certainly answered a lot of questions. A big hand, all of you. Hindol will be signing books, so get yourself a copy and make him a little richer than he already is. Thank you all. Thank you.
And with that, we would like to thank Hindol Sengupta and Makarand R Paranjape for this riveting session. We thank ABP Live for their support.